A lump in epigastrium. A 65 years old Hindu male patient Dagdu, staying at Mahim, car driver by occupation, comes with complaints of pain in abdomen since 2 months, lump in abdomen and vomiting after food since 6 weeks. The patient was apparently alright 2 months back when he first experienced belching and fullness of stomach after food. After 1 week, this was replaced by pain and vomiting after meals. The pain is felt in the epigastrium. It is dull aching throughout the day but not disturbing the sleep. It is aggravated and becomes sharp shooting when food is taken. It radiates to the angle of left scapula since 2 weeks. What does the radiation to the back suggest? That it is originating either from pancreas or from a lesion in the stomach and duodenum which is infiltrating the retroperitoneal tissues. It is experienced with all types of food including milk and water and is followed by vomiting. Vomiting does not relieve the pain. Patient eats less for the fear of pain. What type of pain is this? This is the pain of a gastric ulcer aggravated by food. But since it is radiating to the back and not relieved by vomiting, acute exacerbation of the ulcer and posterior penetration of gastric ulcer and gastric carcinoma should be kept in mind. Vomiting is preceded by nausea. It is non-projectile, non-bilious and contains undigested food. No history of hematemesis. How does a vomit of hematemesis look? Dark brown if from the stomach and duodenum and fresh bright red color if from the esophagus. Why? Because of the action of hydrochloric acid on hemoglobin in stomach producing acid hematine which is of brown color. Simultaneously, the patient noticed a lump above the umbilicus which is constant in size over the last month. Well, the history has been very suggestive. What do you think of the lump at this stage? Sir, from the history, the lump appears to be originating from the stomach, probably a carcinoma of stomach or posterior penetration of peptic ulcer. But I cannot be sure about it unless I have ruled out other causes, for even an epigastric hernia can mimic gastric symptoms. Right. And from exam point of view, the main part of history presentation begins now. The patient's story of positive points is over and your story of negative points begins. At this stage, bring before your mind all the organs in that area and the types of lumps that can arise from them and then rule them out. Now I will talk aloud the thinking part, that is the organs and the names of the lumps arising from them, and you present the related negative points. Let us start. First, the stomach. Carcinoma of stomach. There is history of anorexia, nausea and recent weight loss of 5 kg in last 2 months, but no history of melena and hematemesis. Paragastric abscess, that is subacute perforation of peptic ulcer. No history of pain related to food in the past, no history of fever. Trichobezoar. No psychological disturbances or habit of eating hair. Liver, hepatoma. No history of chronic alcoholism, no history of weight loss with jaundice and distension of abdomen, with edema, feet impotency or breast swelling. Amoebic liver abscess. No history of blood and mucus in the stools in the past, no history of fever with chills with pain referred to shoulder or pain on coughing. A hydatid cyst. No history of close contact with dogs in the childhood, no history of urticaria. A gallbladder, hydrops or empyema of gallbladder. No history of flatulent dyspepsia, biliary colics or high fever with chills and jaundice. No history of blood disorders in the family. Pancreas. No recent attack of acute epigastric pain radiating to the back, relieved by stooping, with vomiting and retching. No history of diarrhea with frothy offensive stools. No history of progressive jaundice with weight loss and melena. A transverse colon, carcinoma. No history of alternate diarrhea and constipation with fresh blood in the stools. No history of colicky pains, borborygmi, constipation and vomiting. Lymph nodes, filariasis. No history of fever with chills with pain in the inguinal region. Tuberculosis. No history suggestive of pulmonary tuberculosis. Lymphoma. No history of swellings in the neck, axilla and groin. Secondaries. No history of scrotal swelling. Alright. And now for the sake of completion, let us discuss here about the other organs also which are not in epigastrium. Kidneys. hydro and pyonephrosis due to calculus or tuberculosis, and malignancy. No history of pain in the loins or urinary colic, no history of edema of feet or puffiness of face in the morning, no history of frequency of micturition, dysuria, pyuria and hematuria, no history of sudden passage of large amount of urine with decrease in the size of the swelling. What is that? For details crisis in hydronephrosis, this history should be asked in a lump that appears and disappears. Right. And which lumps in abdomen appear and disappear? Intersusception and details crisis in hydronephrosis. Yes. Now the spleen. Malaria, Kala-Azar and typhoid. No history of continuous fever or intermittent fever with rigors, leukemias and lymphomas. No history of recent weight loss, bleeding gums, bone pains and repeated infections. No history of swellings in the neck, axilla and groin. Hemolytic anemia. No history of attacks of jaundice and biliary colics. No history of blood disorders in the family. Portal hypertension. No history of hematemesis, abdominal distension or liver cell failure with jaundice or altered consciousness. In a case of splenomegaly, I will specifically ask history suggestive of etiology of portal hypertension. For example, in a young child, history of umbilical sepsis or home delivery, history of severe diarrhea or major illness in childhood which might have caused dehydration, history of jaundice, and in an adult, I will ask for history of chronic alcoholism, history of severe jaundice, history of blood transfusions, and history of abdominal distension or lump. Good. And lastly, the small intestines. History of roundworms in stools or vomit, history of colicky pains and borborygmi with vomiting and constipation. Go ahead. No family history of peptic ulcer, CA stomach or blood disorders. Personal history, patient is non-alcoholic, smokes 8 to 10 cigarettes per day for last 30 years. Bowel habits, micturition and sleep are normal. No history of any specific treatment taken except on examination. On general examination, let's start with the examination of abdomen. On inspection, the contour of the abdomen is scaphoid, no generalized distension. What are the causes of generalized distension of abdomen? Classically described as 5 F's: fat, fluid, flatus, feces and fetus, to which may also be added fetal growth or tumor. Yes, if in standing position only the lower abdomen looks protuberant, what will you think of? Sir, if seen only on standing, it is likely to be due to poor abdominal muscle tone or rarely visceroptosis. If it persists in lying down position also, full bladder and pelvic or lower abdominal tumors should be thought of. Proceed. The abdomen is scaphoid, no generalized distension. There is a diffuse bulge in the epigastrium which disappears on rising test. What is rising test? Ask the patient to lie supine with arms folded over the chest. Then ask him to raise his neck without support. This makes the abdominal wall muscles, mainly the recti abdominis, contract so that a parietal swelling superficial to the muscles will become more prominent while intra-abdominal swellings will become less prominent. Why do the recti contract when neck is raised? To stabilize the thoracic cage which acts as the fixed point over which the neck flexes. Any other way to make abdominal wall muscles taut? 1. The leg lifting test, where the patient is asked to lift the extended legs off the bed by flexion at the hips when obliques will contract to stabilize the pelvis. And 2. Valsalva's maneuver, that is attempting to blow out against closed vocal cords so the abdominal wall muscles contract to raise the intra-abdominal pressure. These tests, the leg lifting and the Valsalva maneuver, are more suited for laterally placed swellings, while swellings under the recti close to the midline are better tested with the rising test. Is there any other test to differentiate intra from extra-abdominal swellings? On inspection, note the movement of the swelling with respiration. A swelling that moves up and down with respiration is definitely intra-abdominal. And if it doesn't, then it is of no significance, as all intra-abdominal swellings do not move with respiration. Why? Because only those intra-abdominal swellings that arise from organs like liver, gallbladder, stomach, spleen, and kidneys, which are in direct or indirect contact with the dome of the diaphragm and are free to move, will move with respiration. And even these swellings will not move if they are fixed to the surrounding structures by infection or malignant infiltration. The skin shows no dilated veins, scars or sinuses. Where do you get dilated veins over the abdomen? First, caput medusae or periumbilical dilated veins with centrifugal flow in portal hypertension. Secondly, vertically running lateral veins with upward flow in inferior vena cava obstruction. Thirdly, over the lower abdomen in association with varicose veins. And lastly, local distended veins over malignant abdominal wall tumors. Yes, how do you determine the direction of blood flow in the veins? By Harvey's test. Keep two index fingers close together over the vein and move one finger away so as to empty a segment of the vein. Release one of the fingers and note the rate of refilling of the vein. Now repeat the procedure, this time releasing the other finger. The direction in which the vein fills more rapidly is the direction of the blood flow. Umbilicus is normal in position and shape. Which abnormalities of umbilicus did you look for? Displacement of umbilicus away from the swelling, transverse stretching or eversion seen in ascites, deep or tucked in umbilicus in obesity. Alright, continue. The abdomen moves well with respiration, no visible peristalsis or pulsations. How do you differentiate between peristaltic movements and pulsations? Sir, they are totally different movements. Yes, but what is the differentiating point of pulsation? Sir, pulsation is a movement which is repetitive and synchronous with the pulse beat. Right. Now tell me, when can you see pulsations in the epigastric region? Sir, in very thin persons, normal pulsations of the abdominal aorta or heart may be transmitted to epigastrium. The pathological conditions are 1. Aneurysm of abdominal aorta, and 2. A tumor situated over the aorta and transmitting its pulsations to the abdominal wall. And lastly, pulsatile enlarged liver in tricuspid regurgitation. And when are the peristalsis visible? In pyloric stenosis and early stage of dynamic intestinal obstructions. The peristaltic waves pass from left costal margin to right in pyloric stenosis and from right to left in transverse colon. They are seen best by looking at the abdomen tangentially. In small intestinal obstruction, a step ladder pattern of peristalsis may be seen. Right, and in suspected cases of obstruction, if you are looking for peristalsis, flick the abdominal wall lightly or pour a few drops of ether which will stimulate the peristalsis. Go ahead. The hernial sites are normal, no scrotal swelling, spine shows no deformity, no paraspinal swelling, no fullness in the loins. On palpation, you have missed something in inspection. Sir, no fullness or swelling in left supraclavicular region. Right, exactly what I wanted. Sir, we have been told that. What? That if at the end of presentation of a case of abdominal lump, the examiner brings to your notice that you have forgotten something, think of 4 things that you have probably missed. Which ones? Left supraclavicular or Furcow's lymph nodes, spine, hernial sites, and examination of testis and genitalia. Oh, I see. Can you tell me what relation supraclavicular nodes have got with an abdominal lump? Sir, left supraclavicular lymph nodes can be enlarged due to metastasis from any abdominal visceral carcinoma, especially carcinoma of stomach, liver and pancreas, and testicular tumors. Why do metastasis involve only the left supraclavicular nodes? Because the spread occurs via the lymphatics that ultimately drain into the thoracic duct, which opens on the left side of the neck into the left internal jugular vein. Any other way in which supraclavicular nodes may be enlarged with an abdominal lump? Possible in a case of generalized lymphadenopathy or lymphomas, where an enlarged spleen or retroperitoneal lymph nodes give rise to an associated intra-abdominal lump. On palpation, there is no local rise of temperature. What is the position of the patient during palpation? Tell me the ideal method. Sir, the patient should lie supine on a firm bed with a pillow under the head and 1 or 2 pillows under the knee, thus flexing the neck and the hip. If possible, a backrest of 20 degrees should be inserted to relax the recti further. If your arms are cold, warm them by rubbing against each other. Ask the patient to breathe quietly with open mouth. Begin palpation away from the site of the lump or pain. Palpate with the fingers straight and flat over the abdomen, flexing at the metacarpophalangeal joints. Palpate gently, pressing during the expiratory phase of respiration. What did you find on palpation? There is no local rise of temperature. There is mild tenderness 2 centimeters below the zipisternum. No rebound tenderness, guarding or rigidity. What is rebound tenderness? Palpate gently over the tender area, gradually increasing the pressure during each expiration. Press the fingers as deep into the abdomen as possible and take the hand away suddenly. A sharp pain on withdrawal of the hand is rebound tenderness, and it indicates the presence of peritonitis. For example, rebound tenderness in a case of intestinal obstruction strongly suggests strangulation of gut. How did you determine the point of maximum tenderness? By pressing the index finger vertically and gently at various points. How does it help? So the site of point of maximum tenderness may indicate the likely cause of underlying pathology. For example, in a gastric ulcer, it is midway between zipisternum and umbilicus. In duodenal ulcer, 1.5 inches to the right of midline, just below the costal margin. In gallbladder disease, just below the tip of the 9th costal cartilage. In appendicitis, the McBurney's point at the junction of middle and lateral thirds of a line joining umbilicus and right anterior superior iliac spine. In renal diseases, in the renal angle, that is between the lower border of the 12th rib and the lateral border of sacrospinalis. How do you grade the severity of tenderness? Mild tenderness is tenderness on deep pressure. Moderate tenderness is presence of protective spasm or guarding. And severe tenderness is the presence of rigidity or of rebound tenderness. What is the difference between guarding and rigidity? Sir, both are reflex contractions of abdominal wall muscles in response to inflammation or irritation of parietal peritoneum. In the early or milder stages, the reflex contraction occurs only when the peritoneum is disturbed and irritated by the palpating finger. This is known as guarding. Later, when definite inflammation sets in the parietal peritoneum, the muscle contraction becomes persistent even at rest. This is termed as the rigidity. And what is voluntary rigidity? If the patient keeps the abdominal muscles stiff for the fear of being hurt, it is termed as voluntary rigidity. How do you differentiate it from true rigidity and guarding? Voluntary rigidity is always generalized and bilateral, which means that localized guarding is always pathological. Secondly, if gentle palpation is carried out, voluntary rigidity reduces and may disappear during expiration, while true rigidity remains constant. How can you eliminate the element of voluntary rigidity? The patient's confidence must be gained by being gentle in behavior. Fingers should not be poked deep and suddenly, and palpate with a flat hand gently and during expiration. What is the significance of muscle rigidity? It indicates irritation of the underlying parietal peritoneum. So if present over the upper half of right rectus, it suggests a peptic ulcer perforation. If over the right iliac fossa, acute appendicitis, and so on. Okay, proceed. On deep palpation, a single intra-abdominal lump is palpable. Very good. Start your deep palpation findings by first mentioning whether the lump is intra-abdominal or extra-abdominal. Otherwise, you will invariably forget to mention this very important point. On deep palpation, a single intra-abdominal lump is palpable in the epigastrium extending into the umbilical and right hypochondriac region. How do you demarcate these regions? Sir, abdomen is divided into 9 regions by 4 imaginary lines, 2 vertical and 2 horizontal. 2 vertical lines are drawn through the mid-inguinal point below, that is midway between symphysis pubis and anterior superior iliac spine, and above the midpoint on clavicle between acromioclavicular joint and the center of suprasternal notch. The upper horizontal line is the subcostal plane, a subcostal or transpyloric. Subcostal plane. Sir, for anatomical descriptions, transpyloric plane through the tip of the ninth costal cartilage has been considered as the upper horizontal line. But clinically, when drawn on the patient, it crosses the vertical line on the rib cage, thus leaving no part of hypochondrium accessible to palpation. So clinically, subcostal plane passing through the lowest point of costal margin, that is the lower border of 10th costal cartilage, is considered as the upper horizontal line. It corresponds with the upper border of 3rd lumbar vertebra. The lower horizontal line is the transtubercular plane, passing through the tubercles on the outer border of the iliac crests, about 5 centimeters behind the anterior superior iliac spine. It corresponds to the upper border of 5th lumbar vertebra. Is this also the line joining the highest points of iliac crest? No, sir. This line between the highest points of iliac crest is about 2.5 to 3 centimeters above the transtubercular plane and corresponds to L34 disc and umbilicus. And what lies at transpyloric plane? So transpyloric plane corresponds to the tip of the ninth costal cartilage and its junction with the linea semilunaris or the lateral border of rectus, the lower border of 1st lumbar vertebra, midpoint between cipisternum and umbilicus, and midpoint between suprasternal notch and symphysis pubis. And in the abdomen, it passes through the pylorus, neck of the pancreas, and the kidney hyla. Coming back to 9 abdominal regions, can you name them? In the upper third, epigastrium in the center with right and left hypochondria. In the middle third, umbilical region with right and left lumbar regions. And in the lower third, hypogastrium flanked by right and left iliac regions. The lump has a smooth surface. It is firm, non-tender and non-indentable. Is it ballotable? Sir, the test of ballotability does not apply to this swelling as it is not in the lumbar region and the spine behind it does not allow a push to be given from behind. Then which swellings are ballotable? To be ballotable, the swelling should lie in the lumbar region and should have a long pedicle. The renal and the suprarenal swellings are ballotable unless they are fixed due to inflammation or malignant infiltration or are so large as to touch the anterior abdominal wall. Why? What happens if it touches the anterior abdominal wall? Then both the hands touch the swelling simultaneously and it is not possible to toss the swelling between the hands. How do you do the test for ballotability? Keep one hand gently over the abdominal wall overlying the swelling and with the other hand placed in the loin just lateral to sacrospinalis, give a sharp forward jerk to the swelling. If the swelling is ballotable, the upper hand will feel the swelling touching the anterior abdominal wall and fall back. Ballotability means free mobility in antero-posterior direction. Where else can you apply this test of ballotability? For other intraperitoneal mobile swellings, especially in the presence of ascites, for pelvic swellings with the watching hand over the hypogastrium and the displacing fingers in the rectum or vagina, and classical application of ballotment is in the confirmation of pregnancy between 6 and 10 weeks. How does it differ from bimanual palpation? Sir, bimanual palpation is the ability to palpate a swelling between two diametrically opposite placed hands simultaneously. When possible, it helps in judging the exact size, dimensions and consistency of intra-abdominal swellings. The lump is firm, non-tender, non-indentable with a smooth surface. The margin is well defined in the lower half but is hidden under the costal margin in the upper half. Fingers can be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin. It is fixed in all directions and does not move on respiration. It exhibits transmitted pulsations of aorta which disappear in knee-elbow position. Why do you say they are transmitted? Firstly, by two-finger test, that is, when I kept two index fingers on two sides of the swelling, they rose with each pulsation but did not separate from each other. In which swelling would they have separated from each other? In aneurysm of abdominal aorta, because of the expansile pulsations, that is, expansion in all directions. Secondly, in knee-elbow position, the pulsations disappear as the swelling falls away from the aorta. On palpation of the rest of the abdomen, liver, spleen and both kidneys are not palpable, no other lump in the abdomen, no colonic tenderness, no right intercostal tenderness, Very nice. After completing palpation of the lump, palpate specifically for liver, spleen, both kidneys and any other lump, and looking for amoebiasis, especially in liver swelling, colonic and right intercostal tenderness. No expansile impulse over the hernial sites on cuffing. Both the testes are in scrotum, normal in size and shape. Why? If a testis is not in scrotum, it will produce an epigastric lump. Sir, an undescended abdominal or inguinal testis is prone to malignant change with a very high incidence of 1 in 80, and a seminoma will often present with a epigastric swelling due to enlarged para-aortic lymph nodes, the primary being too small to be noticed. So in every case of epigastric lump, it is very important to see whether both the testes are in the scrotum, and if they are, do they show any signs of malignancy? Right. So both the testes are in the scrotum, normal in size and consistency. Testicular sensations are present. In which conditions are testicular sensations lost? Leprosy, testicular tumors, gamma and testicular atrophy. The atrophy may be secondary to orchitis, estrogen therapy or chronic liver cell failure in cirrhosis. There is no tenderness or deformity of the spine, no paraspinal muscle spasm, no renal angle tenderness. Left supraclavicular lymph nodes are not palpable. How did you look for renal angle tenderness? With the patient sitting up with arms folded in front, I placed my thumb under the 12th rib and made short jabbing movements with increasing strength. This is also known as Murphy's kidney punch. On percussion, a dull note over the lump, not continuous with the liver dullness, which is of normal size. Upper border of liver dullness is in the 6th intercostal space in mid-clavicular line as confirmed by tidal percussion. The splenic dullness is normal, no evidence of free fluid in the abdomen. You said there is no free fluid. Sir, no clinical evidence of free fluid. That is, free fluid up to 1 to 1.2 liters may be present. Do you mean to say that less than 1 liter of fluid cannot be clinically detected? Not by routinely performed tests. By Poodle sign, as little as 500 ml of fluid can be detected. How do you do this test? With the patient in knee-elbow position, percuss over the dependent umbilical area. Dullness indicates presence of fluid. Or keep a stethoscope near the umbilicus in midline and scratch the abdominal wall from periphery to center. If fluid is present, the intensity of sound will increase when the border of fluid is reached. And what are the routine tests performed for detecting fluid? Dullness in the flanks with shifting dullness, horseshoe-shaped dullness and fluid thrill. How do you do these tests? For shifting dullness, with the patient lying supine, percuss from the umbilicus towards the flanks. When dullness is reached, keep the finger just inside the line of dullness and turn the patient to the opposite side. Wait for a few seconds to allow the fluid to gravitate to the opposite side and percuss again. Change of dull note into resonant one confirms the presence of fluid, and the test is completed by making the patient horizontal and demonstrating that the note becomes dull once again. And if the note does not change, then the dullness in the flank is not due to free fluid. It may be due to a solid intraperitoneal swelling or encysted fluid collection. Is there any other way to confirm that dullness in the flanks is due to fluid? Sir, by demonstrating fluid thrill with the patient lying supine and an assistant pressing the ulnar edge of his hand firmly in the midline in umbilical region. Keep one hand gently over one lumbar region and tap the other lumbar region with the other hand. A definite impulse felt by the palpating finger is described as fluid thrill. Is the test foolproof? No, sir. False negative result may be obtained if the fluid collection is not tense, and a false positive result may be obtained in presence of a large ovarian cyst and by transmission of an impulse through the subcutaneous fat of the abdominal wall. This can be prevented by keeping a hand in the center. How do you clinically judge the amount of fluid in the peritoneal cavity? Positive Poodle sign means more than 500 ml. Shifting dullness in the flanks 1.2 to 2 liters. Horseshoe-shaped dullness more than 2 liters. What is the amount of fluid normally present in peritoneal cavity? About 150 ml. And in presence of fluid thrill? Sir, thrill does not depend on the amount, but the tension of the fluid. However, more than 1.2 liters of fluid is required for the fluid thrill to be demonstrable. Any other type of thrill in the abdomen that you know of? Sir, hydrated thrill or the after thrill. 3 fingers are placed lightly over the cystic lump in the abdomen and the central or middle finger is percussed. If the hydrated cyst contains free-lying daughter cyst and brood capsules, they are displaced, and when they move and strike the cyst wall, an after thrill is felt by the lateral 2 fingers. On auscultation, normal peristaltic sounds are heard. Can you describe normal peristalsis? Sir, they are low-pitched gurgling sounds occurring every 10 to 20 seconds. What variations can you get in a diseased abdomen? Firstly, absence of peristalsis in paralytic ileus and late phase of dynamic intestinal obstruction. Secondly, hyperperistalsis or porvorygmy in subacute intestinal obstruction or early phase of acute obstruction. And lastly, high-pitched tinkling sounds when the proximal loops become distended and the displacement of fluid from one loop to another produces tinkling sounds. What is your diagnosis? Sir, I would like to do colorectal examination for pelvic deposits. Diagnosis: intra-abdominal lump in epigastrium. I would like to give a differential diagnosis. First, big carcinoma of stomach. Second, malignant lymph nodes, probably lymphoma. Why do you say that the lump is intra-abdominal? Because on contraction of the abdominal wall muscles, the visible bulge in the epigastrium diminishes in size and lump becomes difficult to palpate. And if it had become easier to palpate, then I would have thought of parietal swellings and quickly tested its mobility over the contracted muscles. If it is freely mobile, it is superficial to the muscle, like a subcutaneous lipoma, fibroma, etc. And if it becomes fixed to the contracted muscle, then it probably is arising from the muscle or muscle sheath, like the desmoid tumor. I think this is amoebic liver abscess in the left lobe of liver. Do you agree? No, sir. The lump is present for last 2 months with no history of fever with chills, with pain referred to shoulder, no history of blood and mucus in stools in the past, no history of chronic alcoholism. On examination, the lump is firm, non-tender, fingers can be insinuated between the lump and the costal margin. It does not move with respiration. Right lobe of liver is not palpable, no colonic or intercostal tenderness. On percussion, dullness over the lump is not continuous with the liver dullness. So I do not think that this can be amoebic liver abscess. Why not carcinoma of transverse colon? Sir, no history of altered bowel habits or fresh blood in the stools, no history of colicky pains, increasing constipation and abdominal distension. Though the physical findings can be consistent with a colon carcinoma, it is very unlikely that such a large tumor in colon will be without any colonic symptoms. Right. That is how a question should be answered when the examiner asks, why not this? Name the typical history and examination findings of that condition which are absent in the given case, and hence it cannot be that condition.